Who are you kissing when the ball drops? I'm Kevin Cirilli. It's time for the Daily Debrief. Let's get right to it. Maine officials have barred former President Donald Trump from the primary ballot, citing the insurrectionist clause in the 14th Amendment. The Trump campaign says they will aggressively fight the ruling, the second time this month a state has ruled against him from appearing on a ballot, the other being Colorado. Joining us now to break down the latest political headlines is my friend and colleague, Julia Manchester. Julia, thanks for being here. It's been the same reaction as Colorado with regards to Maine. Democrats and Republicans say that the voters, not a judge, should decide who's on the ballot. What's America thinking?
Yeah, on that point, look, America is, I would say, overall not exactly happy about this. I think there are Democrats who would support this and are going to support it going forward when other states expectedly do this. But I thought it was really interesting that the Democratic congressman from Maine, Jared Golden, said yesterday that he disagreed with the state's Democratic Secretary of State on this ruling. And, to add to that dynamic, the National Republican Campaign Committee, for those watching at home, that's the House Republican campaign arm, they started attacking Golden after the ruling was released, tying him to the Secretary of State, posting pictures of him and the Secretary of State. But now we're seeing Golden trying to distance himself from this. So I think what that shows is that this could be a politically perilous situation for Democrats going forward if other states go in this direction as Colorado and Maine have.
Well, Nikki Haley, she's even saying that she would pardon Trump if she was elected president. Do the other folks in the race agree with her?
Yeah, look, I think the other folks in the race certainly agree with her on that point. They are afraid of the Trump base on this issue. They're trying to get a slice of that base in many cases, like with Ron DeSantis. They share that base with Donald Trump. So on this issue, they want to appear maybe pro-Trump without appearing pro-Trump, if that makes sense in this regard. So going forward, it puts them in a difficult position. But at the end of the day, Kevin, you and I are talking about this with Donald Trump. We're not talking about the other candidates and their visions and platforms for the future. We're talking about Donald Trump once again, facing some sort of legal or political, roadblock, if you will, that will eventually or could eventually end up benefiting him.
Well, you're right. I mean, we're not talking about the future, but a lot of us are talking about the Civil War because of Nikki Haley's comments. And she clarified her remarks on the Civil War at a campaign stop. We got the tape. Let's watch.
Of course, the Civil War was about slavery. We know that. That's unquestioned, always the case. We know the Civil War was about slavery.
So, Julia, is this going to be enough damage control for the Haley campaign to keep making the case that she's got momentum, or has Chris Christie sort of stolen the big mo from her?
Yeah, look, it's difficult for Haley going forward, and couldn't have come at a worse time for her campaign. The Hill's decision desk polling average, that is, of polls in New Hampshire shows Haley 17 points behind Donald Trump. That's a pretty narrow lead compared to other leads Donald Trump has held nationally and in other states throughout the primary cycle. Chris Christie is at 10%. So theoretically, if Chris Christie were to drop out of the race, and theoretically, if his supporters were to go to Haley, that could definitely narrow the gap. However, with this flub that Haley had in New Hampshire and Christie now going on the offensive against Haley on her remarks, that makes that dynamic much more difficult for Haley. And we don't know if Christie, by the way, is going to drop out. He's given no indication that he will. However, he's, supposedly shares this never Trump base with Haley. So going forward, it's hard to see how this impacts her. We know that the news cycle moves very fast, but it came at a time when she is very much having this momentum on the rise going forward.
Well, and the Christie campaign, Julia, to your point, capitalized off of this. They're flooding the Granite State ahead of the January 23rd primary with an ad buy saying that he is not getting out of the race, saying that that he is the person to take on Trump. And he criticized Haley on the campaign trail. I'm not sure if you saw that, but he was forcefully pushing back and drawing a contrast against her, trying trying to get her supporters to back him. The crosstabs on the Hill's Decision Desk 2024 have him at 11%. So to your point again, Haley's 17 points behind Trump in the granted state. Even if she were to miraculously get every single voter of those 11%, that still wouldn't be enough to close that gap. Switching gears though, down in Georgia, a federal judge has approved upholding the state's newly revised political maps. And the new map all but ensures that Republicans are going to keep their 9-5 congressional advantage in the Peach State. Is this fair?
Look, I think it depends who you're talking to on whether this is fair. I think you're going to see Republicans argue that it's fair. Democrats would argue that, it might disenfranchise voters of color, other voters in the state. This is going to be back and forth that we're going to see going forward in Georgia, because we know that Georgia is one of the narrowest of swing states, and it could be, the first state in the South to reliably go Democrat. We know that there's 2 Democratic senators from Georgia and a Republican president or governor from Georgia. It was a swing state back in the 2020 presidential election, obviously. So this is a battle that Republicans are going to try to win no matter what. And I think we're going to see it politically play out in the courts and at the ballot box.
So that's what's happening in Georgia. Let's go back to Colorado. Lauren Boebert, she's switching districts. So is she going to be attacked as a carpetbagger? I mean, what's going on with Boebert?
She's already being attacked as a carpetbagger online and by a lot of her critics. Look, Lauren Boebert won her reelection bid in 2022 by less than 1,000 votes. It was a very, very narrow margin. It was very much the black sheep of the 2022 midterm elections. We didn't see that one coming, and it ended up being very close. Cook Political Report rated that district as a toss-up. However, now she's running in Ken Buck's, or outgoing Republican Congressman Ken Buck's district. So it's a much safer Republican district. We'll see how she does there. Ken Buck, and her certainly have their differences within the Republican Party, but this is a move to ensure that she doesn't have as close of a race going up against the Democrat in that district.
Well, and those moderates are really going to be such a key determining factor of how that district goes and the direction for the Republicans. And one of the issues that moderate Republicans care about, as you know, is immigration. So when you've got Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying that he's gotten a deal with Mexico on immigration, is that going to be enough to one, stop the border crisis and the 11,000 or so migrants who are in northern Mexico from coming here? But also, what exactly is that agreement going to do in the long term to solve this crisis?
Well, that's exactly it. It depends what this agreement ends up doing. Look, after their meeting earlier this week, we heard that the meeting was good. It went well. It was productive, but we didn't have a lot of details coming out of that meeting. And we know that voters, as they see images of these thousands of migrants coming across the border, they want to know what's in a deal, what are in these conversations and such. So, it's going to depend what happens. And we know that during the Trump administration, there was the Remain in Mexico policy. Trump very much stood up to Obrador or threatened him with the possibility of tariffs. So, the Biden administration has been getting some pushback from moderates and Republicans for not being as strong against Obrador and the Mexicans in this. So I think it depends on what's in the deal. But Democrats are certainly under a lot of pressure, even from other Democrats. You see New York City Mayor Eric Adams, the Chicago mayor, talking about how they can't handle this influx of migrants coming from the border. So Biden's under pressure from all sides here.
So switching gears, it's the end of the year. What was the weirdest story, Julia Manchester, that you covered this year?
Oh my gosh, this is such a curveball. I think, we talked about Lauren Boebert in Colorado 3. I think the what was it? She was in a show, a Beetlejuice, I believe, and she was asked to leave the show for vaping and some inappropriate conduct. We don't really expect that from our members of Congress, and we know that Lauren Boebert's a bit of a firebrand. So it was certainly something to watch there. A very interesting political story for all of us.
Are U.S. officials going to announce that there's life out there in the new year?
Oh my gosh, we've heard so much about UFOs, and I know our partners at News Nation have a lot of reporting on this. I don't know if they'll talk about whether there's life, but I think they're going to talk about, this issue of UFOs, or the story about them is going to continue. I don't know where the UFOs are coming from. I think we're going to hear more maybe about government programs that may be secret, or, other foreign programs, but UFOs aren't going away.
Well, News Nation has been out front on that, and it is a very serious topic. And
Yes.
personally, I think, quite frankly, a lot of folks who are laughing at it, they need to wake up and they need to understand that this is U.S. taxpayer money, and you've got serious lawmakers from on the left and the right who are asking very serious questions. So yes or no, one-word answer before I let you go. Julia Manchester, will the general election be between Biden and Trump?
Yes.
Happy New Year, Julia Manchester.
Happy New Year.
Thank
Got
you,
me
Julia.
there.
Thanks. And we hope you've had a great holiday season. I'm Kevin Cirilli. It's time for your weekly rewind. President Biden ordered retaliatory airstrikes against Iran-backed terrorists after they injured 3 American soldiers in northern Iraq. The counterattack comes as conflict in the Middle East continues to escalate in the region. U.S. officials have yet to rule out additional use of force. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will head back to the Middle East in an effort to contain the Israel-Hamas war from spreading beyond Gaza. There's growing concern that Israel's military operation will inch closer to Iran, pushing into Lebanon and the Red Sea. The Gaza Health Ministry said that 50 Palestinians were killed earlier during Israeli airstrikes, bringing the total death toll just over 21,000. An American-Israeli citizen, Judith Weinstein, is now believed to have been killed during the October 7th Hamas attack against Israel. Weinstein, who was 70, was previously believed to have been detained by the terror organization. Blinken and Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas headed to Mexico to meet with Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador and officials about the border crisis. AMLO pledged to help slow migrants crossing into the U.S. illegally. Republican presidential candidate Chris Christie is betting it all on New Hampshire. The former New Jersey governor is flooding the Granite State airwaves with a new ad buy defending his decision to stay in the race. And Nikki Haley, now number 2 in the Granite State, has spent the last 48 hours doing damage control after botching a response while on a campaign stop about the cause of the Civil War. She faced severe backlash from Democrats and Republicans for failing to mention slavery. In case you missed it, here's what she did say.
What was the cause of the United States Civil War?
Well, don't come with an easy question or anything. I mean, I think the cause of the Civil War was basically how government was going to run, the freedoms and what people could and couldn't do.
Trump's legal battles continue to move forward, as does his campaign. Maine officials have moved to bar him from the ballot there, becoming the second state in a month to do so. Meanwhile, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham clucked back against New York Democrats who are backing a bill that would force Chick-fil-A to stay open on Sundays at public rest stops in New York. The fast food chain has always remained closed on Sundays to allow its employees to go to worship if they choose. Graham says he'll introduce legislation to counter the New York bill if it moves forward. Democratic Senators Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut and Ed Markey of Massachusetts urged Elon Musk to recall Tesla's, specifically its steering and suspension parts, following an alarming Reuters report showing that the automaker was aware of the safety flaws that led to the car's malfunction and tried to hide it. The report also alleges Tesla blamed customers, which tech tycoon Musk vehemently denied. Tesla responded on Twitter, calling the article wildly misleading and riddled with incomplete and incorrect information. This year, the iconic New York City Times Square ball will look a little bit different. It's going to be tie-dyed and packed with thousands of bow tie crystals. It's modeled after the same shape of Times Square's cross streets. But some more fun facts about the crystal ball. It's 12 feet in diameter, it weighs nearly 12,000 pounds, and it costs more than $1 million. How many crystals are on that thing? 2,688. And it takes 588 LED light bulbs to power up the 2024 numerals as Frank Sinatra's theme from New York, New York blares from the sound system at the strike of midnight. So, who doesn't love the chairman of the board? Oh, Blue Eyes is my all-time favorite musical artist, and I first became a fan watching Dick Clark bring in each New Year as a kid at my grandmother's house in Delco's Drexel's Hill, watching it, of course, on an analog television. This year, 82-year-old Paul Anka will perform an updated version of another Sinatra staple, My Way. Anka is the English lyricist who wrote the words for the voice on that Sinatra staple. But first things first, why do we even watch a giant ball drop? Well, back in the 1800s, an impact of income inequality and the wealth gap meant that only rich people could afford clocks and watches. Everybody else had to rely on public sundials. But with each of us living on our own speck of this pale blue dot, one person's noon was another person's quarter till. Then the Brits built a time ball above the National Observatory in London that drops every day, still to this day, at 1 p.m. That way, everybody could sync their sundial, so leave it to the crown to keep us organized. In 1907, the first ball dropped in Times Square, and it's dropped every year since, except during the World War II dim-outs of 1942 and 43, when global conflict put a beloved tradition on pause. The technology revolution put time ball operators out of a job, but created a whole new industry of clock and watchmakers. And while time balls are a thing of the past, global conflict, economic inequality, and technological revolutions are still some of the biggest stories on the planet. Just something to think about when the ball drops and Sinatra sings and we each prepare to meet the future. Happy holidays and Happy New Year. That's it for today's Daily Debrief. My name is Kevin Cirilli. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel. And come on back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.